This is After the News. Tonight, after a week of unsavoury allegations, Number 10 urges victims of sexual abuse in Westminster to go to the police. My guests and I will be discussing that. Plus, we'll look ahead to new laws to tackle Britain's gambling problem, find out what Scotland could learn from Catalonia, and what happens when political types turn their hand to comedy. That, plus a first look at tomorrow's big stories in print and online. Welcome to the programme. With me tonight are former First Minister of Scotland turned stand-up comedian Alex Salmond, columnist and former Labour advisor Ayesha Hazarika, and radio presenter and journalist Julia Hartley-Brewer. A few front pages are already in. Let's take a quick look. The Times says Spain is already on the brink after Madrid imposed direct rule over Catalonia. The Telegraph says cracks are beginning to show in the EU after Catalans back independence. There's also the story that claims MPs in Westminster have resisted rules to protect staff from harassment. The Express goes on the crisis in Spain, saying it's EU's worst nightmare. We will come back to that story. And that Westminster harassment story also features Theresa May urging people to report sex pest MPs to police, which was also today's Evening Standard's front page headline. Let's pick up straight away on that story. Downing Street urging victims of sexual harassment by MPs or Westminster staff to go directly to the police. This comes after some women who work in and around Parliament formed a WhatsApp group aimed at warning colleagues about alleged misconduct. Ayesha, let me come to you first on this. As someone who worked in and around Westminster, did you have any experiences of this?
Yeah, I had loads of experiences from when I first started in Westminster at the age of 21 as a civil servant, and it continued. And I think it is a serious problem. Westminster is quite male-dominated. It's like a gentleman's club. There's a lot of late nights, there's a lot of subsidised booze. There is quite a culture of being bawdy. Now, that makes it quite a fun place to work, but that's no excuse for just having outdated, sexist, misogynistic behaviour, particularly when we're in a time where we're trying to encourage more women to get into politics.
Was there anybody you used to go and talk to about this, though?
No, there was nobody I could really go and talk to, particularly where I worked. When I first started, my office was pretty male-dominated. All the top jobs were men, so who was I going to go to? I was like the junior admin person there, and it was actually one of my bosses who was sort of doing it to me, so who was I going to go to?
Well, the police. I mean, that's what Theresa May said, Julia
Well, I think it's a bit ridiculous. I doubt very much if most of the cases that we're talking about this sexism and harassment that the WhatsApp group is talking about is actually of a criminal nature at all. Look, absolutely, if we're talking about rapes or sexual assaults or inappropriate long-term stalking harassment, absolutely go to the police. But I think most of what people talk about in the Commons, and I worked in the House of Commons at a time when I was only female political editor, and there were very few women around, and you know, there was some low-level, bit lechy, some old men. Again, a lot of time spent in bars, young women, older men who all thought they, you know, that they had it, they didn't.
So what, you should deal with it there?
Not deal with it. Look, I'm of the view that I would like women to, for a better phrase, man up and deal with some of it themselves, or go to other women. You said there weren't other women for you to go to, but I mean, I've certainly dealt with a number of situations for other women because I'm perfectly capable of dealing with those situations. But I think what is important is that headline you looked at earlier about the MPs resisting the search. MPs are effectively employers. They're not employees of the House of Commons.
Let's bring in Alex at this point. You were an MP. You've got an experience. Does this paint an accurate picture of the Westminster you know, where late night drinks lead to wandering hands?
Well, I think sexism is rife in the House of Commons, but then it's rife across society. Is the House of Commons different from any other workplace? To an extent, because the social and the business are intermixed, rather like television or the media or films. Is this new? No.
But Theresa May saying go to the police.
Well, I agree with Julia. I think it's fatuous. I mean, 99% of what we're talking about are not police matters. But that doesn't make it right, incidentally. It's wrong. I was reading Winifred Ewing's autobiography. In 1967, she's elected. There are 25 MPs in the House of Commons, and she documents a case of serious sexual harassment. She was a party of one, the first SNP MP elected in modern times. A Labour MP harassed her. She went to the Speaker, Horace King, I think it was at the time, and he sorted him out. Your point is she was an MP, there she was able to go at the speaker. It's not so easy for an employee.
Exactly. So what about the power imbalance?
It's an important point.
A lot of this is about power. A lot of this is abuse of power. It often happens because it tends to be men in the top jobs. They think some of this type of behaviour, some of it is not criminal, as Julia says, but they think it's a perk to sort of gently harass somebody, kind of gently kind of keep suggesting that sort of sex is going to be in the cards, all that sort of thing. And I think what Theresa May should be saying, and all political parties should be saying, is, OK, it's one thing for women to speak up, that would be good. How about sending a message to men, which is, don't do this type of behaviour?
I think a lot of it is actually a lot of those men, especially when there's a lot of booze. And I was in the Commons when it was very much more alcohol culture than it was a latte culture in Portcullis House. It was actually that a lot of these men don't read the signals. And the other thing you have to notice, I mean, I saw this for years, the number of young women in the House of Commons throwing themselves at middle-aged male men. I'm sorry,
Julia,
I've been appalled by it over the years.
But that is...
No, it happens. No, I can say it because I saw it, Ayesha. It happens both ways. That's not the same as those women being harassed.
Legitimate.
It doesn't. I didn't remotely.
This kind of,
no, I'm not remotely saying it legitimises it. I'm saying that those men often read the signals wrong.
Oh, well, it's not
men read the signals wrong. What did you want to comment on?
No doubt. I'm sure many men are stupid enough too, but maybe a sense of priority for the. But Theresa May's comment about the police is fatuous, because 99% of sexism is not a police matter. It's wrong, but it's not a police matter. But, if Theresa May said the other day we should respect women in public life, absolutely. Online abuse, dreadful. But how about respecting women, like the rape clause and, universal credit and child benefit? How about, abolishing that? Yeah, wouldn't that respect women across society?
Yeah, but she's looking across where she works and saying if we've got those issues, they need to be stamped out.
What she's doing is reacting to the latest newspaper story with a fatuous comment. Sexism is endemic in society. The House of Commons
represents that. Yes, but there is that power imbalance, which is what she's talking about as well.
In many working environments. But how about respecting women across society? Women who are not in public life.
She's not here to answer for herself. Many people say she does, but we'll come back to that maybe at another point. Now, the weekend's here, and you might be thinking about having a bet on the football or possibly the racing. Nothing wrong with that. But for hundreds of thousands of people in the UK, gambling is a huge problem, with billions of pounds being lost every year. The government is about to announce new rules on betting terminals, but with problem gambling soaring, is it time for much tougher action? Julia, is legislation the way forward on this?
Absolutely. I'm very scared of gambling. And you walk past a betting shop on the high street, and there are a lot more betting shops than there used to be now. You never, when the door opens, you never look in and think, well, there's a bunch of people winning. They always look just sort of rather sort of sad and pathetic. I think that betting shops are I don't like to use the word evil normally. I'm not a religious person, but they are to me, they are evil. A lot of the online gambling that's going on, I know everyone's making a lot of money out of it. I know that the government's making a lot of money out of the taxes.
Nearly £3 billion.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the reasons why they're probably not going to have a crackdown. But when you can gamble on some of these fob teas, the crack cocaine, you get £100 in about 20 seconds. I mean, I think this is obscene. I think this is exploiting people.
Hang on, Ayesha, what about self-restraint? And you work for the Labour Party. It was Labour, of course, who brought this in, relaxed all the rules.
I don't think that was a great mistake, and I think that's something the Labour Party... They absolutely do, and Tom Watson, who's the deputy leader of the Labour Party, is also the shadow culture secretary, is quite clear. He would like to crack down on the law on this. He'd like to reduce fob tea to like £2 a time, and also advertising of gambling and sport have become synonymous. I think one of the things that he's looking at as well is whether you really cut back on the advertising in sport as well. But I think Julia's absolutely right. I think legislation, gambling is a blight on the lives of so many people in the community,
but
and
can
it
you
ruins their
legislate
family.
now at this point? Do you think you can? Because what about self-restraint,
Okay,
Alex
well,
Salmond?
let's draw a distinction. I don't regard these terminals, these gaming machines, as gambling. Gambling, in essence, is you've got a chance of winning. Oh, yeah. If you back a horse...
You were a racing correspondent.
I wrote racing columns for lots of papers and for the Morning Line. But, if you back a horse, your horse could win. No, that is gambling. It's a chance. These online terminals, there is no chance. You must lose. You inevitably lose. Everybody who plays these terminals loses. And therefore, both the ones in shops and, even more insidiously, online, they should be tempered. They should be controlled, because they are, as Julia rightly says, the crack cocaine of gambling. Now, that doesn't mean you restrict. You can't have a society which says, right, we're going to outlaw everything we think is undesirable. But there are certain elements, cause human misery that the law should intervene.
But the gambling industry
normalised
says...
gambling with the National Lottery. We've normalised it with, let's all have a flush on the Grand National. We've normalised it as a normal and reasonable thing to people to spend their money on.
Nobody's going to bankrupt themselves or their family in the National Lottery. They just are not going to do that. The machines that you talk about are different matters.
I remember seeing women soon after the National Lottery started. It was actually a really big issue that they're getting out their envelopes for their money, and they're putting £30 on scratch cards because it normalised gambling for women for the very first time. It was a
we're not talking about £30. We're talking about people who can raise £3,000 in a day.
You know well, it's an awful lot of their household income.
It's a different degree.
Ayesha, final word quickly.
I think Theresa May has a very important opportunity to show real leadership on this issue and take on the gambling industry, and I think she would do herself a lot of credit for taking them on.
Well, there'll be a lot more on this, I'm sure, next week as we get more details. Let's move across to Spain. Has imposed direct rule on the region of Catalonia today, just minutes after the Catalan Parliament declared independence. That leaves the region in something of a constitutional crisis, and it's on many of the UK newspapers' front pages. Let's have a look at the Scotsman, leading with the line that the UK won't recognise an independent Catalonia while the SNP government respects it. Alex, a fantastic day for Catalonia.
Well, we'll see what the outcome is. I mean, Catalonia's declared independence. Spain has abolished Catalonia. I think, there has to be a democratic means of resolving this. I can't see any alternative to having a proper referendum in Catalonia, legally recognised, and allow the people the right to choose.
But does the SNP support this bid for independence?
Well, no, the SNP have supported, quite rightly, Catalonia's right to choose, right to decide. They haven't said to Catalonia, you should vote for independence. That's for the people of Catalonia.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon can't do that, can she? Because if she goes, yes, look at what they've done here, we don't need to have a referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon has said what she should say. Catalonia's right to choose, right to decide, as opposed to the mealy-mouthed hypocrisy of the European Commission, or even more disgracefully, the Westminster government, who, condemn Putin, they'll condemn Turkey, they'll condemn everybody. They didn't say a word about the state police in Spain clubbing old-age pensioners over the head because they were trying to vote.
That is
not
a point worth
from
making.
Boris Johnson.
That's
not a word.
Point worth making, but you're quite unequivocal in your support, aren't you? Because if we just have a look at your Twitter account, I believe we've got a photo from the 21st of September of you holding up a piece of newspaper there saying in support of independence.
No, it supports Catalonia's right to choose. That's the hashtag.
Right to choose.
Right to choose. That's what it
Okay,
says.
not for independence.
It actually says, look at the bottom.
Okay, so let me ask you
let's get this straight. Supports Catalonia's right to choose.
Right to choose. So
yes.
let me ask you a different question. Should the SNP support what's happened in Catalonia tonight?
They should support the right to choose. They should support a process by which Catalonia has the right to decide its own future. Now, the Spanish position is it was an illegal referendum. OK, let's have a legal referendum.
But the SNP's position is at odds with the government right now. The UK government.
The UK government are kowtowing to the Spanish government because they are frightened of the Brexit talks. Let's be quite clear about this. The reason that Theresa May wouldn't say a word about this is she's frightened of Rajoy being objectionable on Brexit. That's what we're being reduced to, that we have to ignore obvious breaches of civil liberties in a Western European society because our government are frightened of people like Senior Rajoy.
Could this be a template for Nicola Sturgeon and her bid for independence?
No, I think the template is the Edinburgh Agreement, where I came to an agreement with David Cameron that we'd have a legally authorised referendum. And we had a legally authorised referendum. And if the Scottish Parliament is elected on a mandate to have another referendum, then they should. Just as if the Catalonian Parliament Assembly is elected on a mandate to have a referendum, then they should be allowed to do so. And, what hope is there for a Europe? Well, what hope is there for a Westminster government if they don't obey the fundamental precepts of democracy, of people's right to choose?
Well, that's what the European Union isn't about democracy, is it?
Or the Westminster
Julia's helped me out there. Julia's cracked a smile because politics, it is a serious issue, very serious business, but what do you do when the voters throw you out? You take to the stage, of course. This is Alex Salmond, I believe, what he looks like unleashed. We've obviously got him live in the studio.
Thank you. And it's big.
Yes, and your tie's already off. I believe that's what you were doing in your Edinburgh show there.
It's got a strip theme.
Let me remind you, though, of a joke that came up on your set. I don't believe it's in your set anymore, but if I could just remind people of this joke, if we can get that. I promised you today, you said to your audience, we'd either have Theresa May, this is to your audience, to your comedy set, or Nicola Sturgeon, or Ruth Davidson, or Melania Trump, but I couldn't make any of these wonderful women come to the show.
Yeah.
No laughs there. How did that, sort of...
Well, I'll tell you
what was the reaction to your
audience. The BBC
audience?
interviewed 40 people outside the show to ask if any of them were offended, and none of them were.
Did they laugh,
This is
though?
a fringe show. Well, the show is totally unscripted. Every show is different. But can I say we've had 23 sellout shows, so on the evidence of the public, then people weren't that offended.
Ayesha, let me ask you.
Let's put it this way. At the pantomime season coming up, you'll hear a great deal worse.
Jokes about women coming to shows. You're a stand-up comedian yourself now.
You get a lot of bawdy sort of sexual jokes on the comedy circuit. It's not exactly a particularly PC thing. No offence, Alex, I just didn't think it was a particularly great joke, to be honest. I think the thing with a controversial joke is you can go as controversial as you like, but the more controversial it is, the more funny it has to be. It has to absolutely be a humdinger, and no offence.
You should have come to the rest of the show.
I was doing my own show. All right, too many shows. Julia,
I don't have an Edinburgh show. I have to say, Alex, I didn't think it was a particularly good joke. I'm not remotely offended by it. I don't understand why anyone would be. The joke is actually on your sexual inadequacy, I thought.
Well, that's right. It's a joke.
Do you know what I love about Alex?
The need to take offence that people have constantly at comedy, I find very, very
The thing that was
ghastly.
interesting about Alex's show, so Alex did a show, Jeremy Corbyn also came up, there's loads of politicians. Jeremy was 10 quid, you were like 20 quid. That is the Barnett formula there in action, isn't
yes,
it?
and that's nothing to do with my family, I would just
Literally
like to
the Barnett
say.
formula.
But Alex, can I ask you, in light, regardless of offence or not, regardless of whether it was a good joke or not, in light of these comments this week and some of the allegations we're hearing about politicians and sleaze, do you in any way regret that joke?
No, I don't, because the whole show is unscripted. It's a fringe show. If that is the limit that people think of sexism in society, if that's actually what people think is sexism, then, pity help all of us.
Why are all-
real
why are all
sexism
jokes that
is
are
what
against
happens to
women
real
sexist?
women.
Well, they're just
in terms of how they live their
boring.
lives, like the rape clause, like the economic inequality in society. So if people would really like to focus on things that are important, that would be
But
really
you do
good.
have to be careful, Ayesha,
Yeah.
don't you, with certain jokes,
Yes.
because you used to help Ed Miliband, didn't you, prepare for Prime Minister's questions?
I did.
How was it writing jokes for Mr Miliband?
It was pretty tough, I'm not going to lie. It was like I had my work cut
He's
out for
really
me.
funny on
He
Twitter
is
now.
actually quite funny. He's like, I actually saw him yesterday. He was like, honestly, why didn't you make me funny? Honestly, this is all your fault.
I love your Ed Miliband.
Yeah, I spent too much time with
Can
him.
you just do a bit more of it?
More Miliband.
Honestly, yeah.
You used to do his makeup as well, is that right?
I did used to do his makeup, and quite often he would complain that I wasn't doing it properly enough, and I should have put some what he called touch éclat around his eyes.
So
and
some
things like
concealer
that.
there, some posh
yes,
concealer.
Exactly.
And you also do quite a nice... I've actually seen your show. I haven't seen Mr Salmond's. I'm sorry about that. But
Did you not get a ticket?
I didn't. It was sold out, man. I mean,
there
mixed
wasn't,
reviews.
There wasn't a single seat left. It was like the SNP in the
But
northeast of Scotland.
you do quite a good Nicola Sturgeon impression
Yes, I'm
to
obsessed
Theresa
with
May.
I did. And actually, I saw Nicola Sturgeon recently on another TV show, and I said to her, I do a thing, and I say to women in the audience, channel your inner Nicola Sturgeon. She went, sometimes I can't even channel my inner Nicola Sturgeon.
And your little impression is of Nicola Sturgeon?
Oh, I can't. You have to come to the show. You got to come to the show.
come on.
I do know what I do. I call her actually. I call her the Beyonce of British politics because she's a woman obsessed with her own independence. She's like, if you like it, you should have put a referendum on it.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Do you find it difficult, Alex, with some of the people who've come to see it? Maybe if there's material about them, some of the politicians?
No, I mean, it's quite... I mean, people talk about the transition between politics and stand-up, like you've carried forward. I probably did it that way in the sense... I mean, firstly, I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I was, as a young lad, I was on the stage. I mean, I was a boy soprano. So it was, to me, that was the preparation for politics, as opposed to the other way around.
I'm learning a lot tonight. Alex Salmond was a boy soprano.
My thing was, I was a comedian, then I joined the Labour Party. That was my...
And then you really got your material.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Hold fire. We are taking a quick break. Don't leave us. Coming up, the rest of tonight's big stories as they come in and the reaction from our comedy panel. Welcome back. Plenty of stories to look at both from the newspapers and online all coming in. The Guardian's front page covers the two main stories we've seen elsewhere. Crisis in Spain over Catalonian independence and MPs demanding action over Westminster harassment. The Huffington Post also focuses on Catalonia independence, reads the headline there. The Mirror's front page, dedicated to the files on JFK's assassination, released, of course, after 54 years by President Donald Trump, who features strongly on Twitter, following a press briefing at the White House today where his press secretary, Sarah Sanders, said all the women who have made allegations of sexual harassment against the president are lying. Julia Hartley-Brewer used to cover this world as a lobby correspondent. Yeah. What do you make of that statement?
Well, I'm not sure you can make any other statement if you're the White House press secretary about allegations that your boss has sexually harassed women. I'm not entirely sure they can all be lying on the basis that he himself has admitted on tape to sexually harassing women, grabbing them by a certain part of their body, and saying that he does this regularly and that you can get away with it, which again goes back to what we were saying about Westminster earlier.
Is it any more powerful, Ayesha, that he has a woman saying that women are lying?
No, I think it absolutely shows you about how if you've got a man in a powerful position, even though you have women around, they can often be in a situation where they have to sort of go along with it. And what he's doing is classic victim blaming. This is the kind of thing that stops women coming forward, the idea that women are asking.
Victim blaming.
Yes, it is.
Just denying allegations against him.
Victim blaming is basically trying to stop women coming forward, sort of saying you're all lying, or you're asking for it, or that is what the subliminal message is, and that's why it's so worrying.
Just zooming out from this, Alex, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, that you've got this situation where a US president has his press secretary saying this.
Well, whether it's his press secretary or Donald Trump, I mean, every time the President of the United States opens his mouth, you can assume it's probably a lie. The other thing is, it does. Well, no doubt, but no doubt we'll get a tweet overnight. But the other thing is, you know, given what Theresa May said today, when he makes this state, non-state, whatever visit it is, will she send the Metropolitan Police to arrest him? Given her statements of today.
Though.
Well, there's plenty. Well, let's put it this way: there's plenty of women making the comments about Donald Trump that she thought that she should make about Westminster.
But of course, you've met Donald Trump. You've had dealings with him. I mean, do you think he's enjoying being president?
That's an interesting question. I think Donald has probably enjoyed the thought of being president more than the reality. I mean, the interesting thing about Trump, and this he shares a characteristic of Tony Blair. He actually is someone who can actually persuade himself that something ridiculous is true, and then he blurts it out to everyone else. Blair was better at it and more convincing at it, but Trump has that characteristic. I believe he actually convinces himself. And this is a guy who I can tell you, in the course of one conversation, can change position 3 times and then claim he didn't change position.
Well, Alex Salmond, thanks for giving us that insight. Julia, Ayesha, thank you very much for your views this evening. And thank you to you. That's it for this evening. Nick and I will be back next week with Nigel Farage, Liz Truss, Emily Thornberry, Shami Chakrabarti, Andrew Pearson, Rachel Johnson, among many others. Join us then. Have a lovely weekend.